They're being called dangerous and exploitive, but ex-sex workers laws put in place during the Harper era are being upheld after an Ontario court dismissed a challenge brought by an alliance of sex workers. After a 5-day hearing, Court Justice Robert Goldstein ruled that the Protection of Communities and Exploited Persons Act is constitutional, and it does not stop sex workers from accessing safety tools and working in cooperation with each other. For more this morning, we're joined by Yelena Vermillion, Executive Director of SWAP Hamilton. That's a group that provides outreach support to street-involved workers. Yelena, good morning.
Good morning. Thank you so much for having me on the show today. I appreciate it.
I'm curious about your reaction to this decision. How big of a blow is this dismissal to sex workers' rights?
While it's certainly a large blow, we find it to be a disgusting decision, and it's just really, another example of how the government does not respect the rights of sex workers. We have to understand that the Charter allows for certain people's charter rights to be violated in a balance, and so the government has decided that sex workers' rights are okay to be violated under the Charter, given their misguided ideas of gender equality. When they talk about our ability to enact safety measures, that may be true in part, but the statement is erroneous. We talk about, we look at any other workplace, electricians, wear certain protection material, PPE. If I wear steel toe boots at a work site, that's all good and dandy. I can have a safe call. I can have an advertisement to have a distance between the client and I. But when it comes to the criminalization, I'm not going into my electrician job. I'm not going into my plumbing job and being criminalized for doing that work. The difference is that when the criminal law fosters these opportunities for exploitation and violence, not just from law enforcement, but also from our clients, it really just spits in the face of all of the advocacy that sex workers have been doing for the last many, many decades across the world. So we're very disappointed, and we also feel infantilized. The decision characterized sex workers as not understanding how the law impacts on their lives, and that's absolutely false. The empirical evidence we provided in our factum is incredibly robust, and it was simply just disregarded. The evidence brought forth by the Crown, the government, and the police were provided a lot higher weight in a determination of the decision. And of course, we do seek to appeal this towards the Ontario Court of Appeal and towards the Supreme Court of Canada if it needs to go that far.
Yelena, for people who may not follow this issue very closely, a lot of focus seems to be around safety and protection. So how do these current laws endanger sex workers, and who do they actually protect?
Sure. So typically right now, if you look at street-based sex workers, this is a really good example of how safety it fosters unsafe situations. You have a street-based sex worker trying to engage in a negotiation with a client on the street, usually out of a car window. Because of the criminalized law, that sex worker is more likely to jump into the car quickly before they've negotiated what services they're going to be offering and at what price. And of course, if you start that conversation while you're in the moving vehicle, you're more vulnerable to violence being put against you. That's just one example. Another example is Black, migrant, Indigenous, and trans sex workers are most impacted by these laws. We see often migrant sex workers who are supporting other migrant sex workers just in community via mutual aid, and they are targeted via the third-party laws, which unfortunately are also unconstitutional. But this court did not decide as such, and as such, we will appeal that towards the Ontario Court of Appeal.
Organizations like SWAP Hamilton have been pushing for the decriminalization of sex work. What would that decriminalization entail?
Decriminalization, we have to look towards other global areas that have instituted this legislative framework. So New Zealand has had the Prostitution Reform Act since 2003. And of course, there's a lot of misunderstanding about what it would mean. It doesn't mean that we'd have brothels on every corner like a McDonald's or the weed stores. It means that we would be removing the state and the government's ability to have control over your bodily autonomy and agency. And that includes for those that engage in selling or trading sexual services. A decriminalized atmosphere would remove the conflict from the law for sex workers and would improve the relationships between them and law enforcement, especially when they're victims of crime or violence. So right now, when you're a victim of crime or violence as a sex worker, when you contact the police, often it is also a dismissive experience where the credibility is not validated by the sex worker. When I testify to a police officer that I've been a victim of crime, often my testimony is invalidated, it's discredited. And also, if we are victims of violence, often that experience of violence is seen as an occupational hazard. I don't believe that murder is an acceptable occupational hazard for anyone, and especially not sex workers. And we live in a world where law enforcement still surreptitiously uses the term NHI, no human involved, when sex workers, people who use drugs, or people who are found dead. And so we really need to rebuke that true disposal of humanity when we're talking about sex workers. And this dismissal of our case is unfortunately another exemplification of the kind of lack of dignity afforded to us in this world and in society.
Yelena, thank you for coming on your morning today.
Thank you so much for having me. Have a lovely week.
Yeah, you as well.
Hey, thanks for watching. If you liked this, be sure to subscribe here, or you can check out more Your Morning videos right here.